Good evening, I'm Bill Oglesby, the professor for the documentary capstone class at VCU's Robertson School of Media and Culture. Welcome to another edition of VCU InDepth. This year's students had more challenges than usual, of course, because of the shutdown associated with the novel coronavirus, which had the bad timing of appearing right in the middle of their semester. The students, though, kept at it and produced what they could, an impressive accomplishment. Again, please keep in mind the technical limitations they faced while working to create some semblance of what they planned. Now, acceptance of the LGBTQ plus community has come a long way, but society didn't always welcome what went against the grain. In this documentary called Meet Me by the Magnolia Tree, student producers Jordan Christie, Joseph Fluitt, and Trevor Reed explore the history of cruising for sex among gay men in Richmond and the way these sexual survival strategies affected the men who participated.
I don't know how these places got started, Bryan Park, Byrd Park, but the Virginia Historical Society years ago, where they've renovated and now they have the parking lot behind the building. At that time, that whole area was covered with these huge boxwoods. They were like 10, 12, 15 feet tall, old boxwoods with pathways in between the boxwoods, and that was where a lot of cruising went on late at night.
There's an area behind the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. There's a row of giant magnolia trees. And I believe back in the day there were two rows, and this was called Battle Abbey. And it was another popular cruise place. And I think this was not as much people picking up in cars, but people actually wander into this thick wooded area right there in the middle of the city and connecting.
I think darkness plays a role in this, that like, of course, cruising happens in broad daylight, but also what happens when the sun goes down, when the lights go off, when those when those cars are not in that parking lot anymore.
But when I would work with gay men back in those days, they would say, if I just want to be sexual, I need something much more efficient. And so if you go to the park, you're not serving cocktails, you're not taking your friends, you're not going to have to talk for an hour and a half. We all know why we're here. And so it was efficient, it was purely sexual.
It's the same way that people now have the phone apps. You're looking for sex. It's easier than going to the bar and cruising in the bar all night and then maybe going home with somebody. You went to the park, you went to the adult bookstore for one reason, and everybody knew that when you were there.
When people say, children are there and so forth, there were no children at 10 o'clock at night in the park, in the rumbles.
I think cruising is basically the search for sex and sexual partners in public space, so away from the home. You might be at a park or at the shopping mall or even at a club.
So cruising is, I want to have sex. I want to have sex with another man. I want that to be fun. I want that to be relatively easy to do. And so I go to these contexts where that can happen.
I think that the history of cruising is something that is really depending on the local. So it really depends on, what the spaces were, what the bars were, how the public spaces were organized in any kind of given space. So the history of cruising in Richmond will be different from it is in San Francisco than it is in New York City than it is in other places. It was also because of people, may have been or were closeted, and so still had a whole livelihood at home around, family and domesticity. And so when you want to have sex with someone but you can't bring them home, where do you go?
There was a segment of the cruising population that would find their way to me because they'd been arrested. And back in those days, primarily in the parks. Sometimes it happened in adult bookstores. Richmond had a cruising area which was called the Block.
The Block was an area downtown near the YMCA and the public library. It was the Block because it was a block of the city there that people would cruise around. and there were a couple of parking lots. And I think that you could find it active at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning.
The block was historic. That cruising venue was around for a very long time. Back in I'd say mid to late 70s, particularly like spring, summer, it could even become sort of an event. People were on the street, cars were going around, and again, it was sort of that idea of a party. It was very free.
The block at that time was a pickup area, but it was also a place where friends would meet and sit out on their cars and talk in the summertime. The only real community that we had to a certain extent were the bars. That's where you met your friends, that's where you built community. Now we have such a large different variety of organizations here in town, healthy ways for people to meet other than in a drinking establishment. People get involved in the community, we bring change about, constructive ways. We didn't have that sort of thing back in the time, and so the bars were the main source of community that we had.
Well, the block was the most public place for cruising, which probably meant that some people didn't go there because it was so popular, and of course the police knew it was there. I remember there was some stigma to people picking up people on the block just because it was public. It also insinuates, if they're kind of desperate, that they're not comfortable with going to a bar or even going to a social situation where they can establish a relationship.
The two parks, the two big ones, people cruised other places, but the two big ones were Bird Park, particularly near the Carillon, and Bryan Park.
I've had friends who would cruise these parks say they would see sometimes cars come by with child seats in the back, which, not with children in them, but it was kind of obvious, okay, this is probably a married man who's out looking for some sex on the side.
I live in Bird Park, and when I first moved there about 25 years ago, the cruising was still going on, and it aggravated me to no end. It made me mad that my community was still out there doing this. Get healthy, get out of the park at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's dangerous, along with all these other things.
Often there was entrapment, meaning I lead you to believe I'm interested in engaging with you, and then once there's any kind of touching, then I arrest you.
To police or harass or crack down on something will always push it more underground. It's kind of comical in the way that that works, that like you think that by having entrapment laws or that by making something illegal that it's going to stop a practice, and actually that makes it more underground and pushes it deeper into out of sight.
You always made the news. You were always in the paper the next morning, usually, when you were arrested. And we have 2 scrapbooks that are historical documents, and they have so many different accounts, articles from the newspapers. They would give your name, your address. Sometimes that he wouldn't say what your occupation is and where you worked. And this is the way so many people found out that their husbands or their sons or their fathers have been arrested on these moral charges of having sex with other men. I think so many of these people were victims of the circumstances that they found themselves in. They were in a situation where they were trying to fill a very basic human need, and they got arrested for doing that. I don't know if you ever really would recover from that. Hopefully you recover enough to pick yourself up and move on and grow from that, but it's still got to be in there. It's got to be probably, I would think, a very vivid memory. That's a horrible experience to go through.
Gay men tended to have better developed coping skills. They had to. In order to survive, you had to learn how to cope.
You develop these like alternative reading strategies and practices. They're practices of survival. They help you live your life, live your fantasy, fill your oats on your own terms. And then when the police finds out, well, then you got to figure out a new way.
There is a kind of a dance, there is a kind of a game in it, and of course it can be very ego enhancing. If people are interested in you, and if you don't feel good about yourself, and people find you attractive, it eases that a bit, at least temporarily. And of course, most people who engaged in that activity wanted to be anonymous, and you were anonymous, so rarely was there exchanging of names, and if there was, then you just made up a name.
Back then, or even maybe till now, people might still do this, but there would be a certain exchange of glances or a certain way of knowing to like look. That's also kind of, maybe it doesn't consummate in sex, but that is also kind of cruising as well. So tapping, certain kind of glancing, it's a kind of flirtation in a way too, you know, and knowing like which park bench to sit on. It's a way of knowing sort of how to work the system.
It's been a part of history. Oscar Wilde got busted in, what was that, the 1800s for promiscuity. So it's always been there. I think when men have that urge to have sex, they're going to seek it out. And if they don't have the outlets where they can find it in a controlled or a safe environment, they may go someplace to a bathroom, to a public park, where they can get it.
I think that the uniqueness was that we were men. These were two men as opposed to a man and a woman. I dare say that if a police officer came up on a man and a woman back in the day having sex in a car in a park, I never read in the paper where they were arrested. And of course it happened, you know, but you didn't get arrested. You probably were laughed at and told to move on.
We are driven by a certain moral code that privileges, you know, domesticity and the family and the home and a heterosexual or even a homonormative model. And I think that things that are purely centered on pleasure and the pursuit of pleasure have, in this country at least, always or long been seen as something that must be punished or quelled or regulated in some way.
Cruising isn't fading away. The channel is changing. So there's plenty of cruising. It's called Grindr, it's called Scruff, and of course, people still cruise in their everyday life, just buying your lunch.
I look back on that time period and I think it's very sad that human beings found themselves in the situation that they would have to dishonestly leave their homes and their wives and probably lie about where they were and go to meet other men in public restrooms and in adult bookstores. It's a sad situation. I'm very happy to say that it has changed. A lot has changed. The world is a lot more accepting of us than they were back in the day.
Our producers remind us that civil rights in the U.S. have come a long way since the bricks thrown at Stonewall. Today, gay people are able to exist out and proud in a safer world. Now, our next mini-documentary this evening is a classic offering from a prior semester, one that did not involve any quarantines. This one dealt with the growth of so-called thrift culture that has brought more than 100 thrift stores to the Richmond metro area. As we see in this doc called Thrifted, many of them offer a hand-picked and curated selection of one-of-a-kind items that you can only find in their stores.
Defining thrifting. The action of buying secondhand goods, if we're using it as an action word. But I also think thrift culture, though, is kind of, I think, can be a mix of many reasons why people want to thrift. It started out because people didn't have a lot of money and they wanted to get decent things for an affordable price. So we are Mamer Sass Reinvented Fashions, and we rescue and reinvent unwanted textiles and vintage clothing. Well, when I was a kid, they called me Mamer, and it was just a family nickname. I was Mamie, Jamie, Mamie, Mamer Sass. So when I started out, I actually started doing jewelry, repurposed jewelry, and when I was trying to come up with a name, that just was like, okay, maybe Mamer Sass. So then when we joined up, I was like, all right, well, would you want to change the name? He's like, no.
But going back, I'm originally from Maryland, and I grew up on a little town on the Eastern Shore, and my dream was to always be a fashion designer and move to the city. So I kind of that was always something I wanted to do. So I studied apparel design at Radford University, and then I moved to New York after I graduated.
Well, my passion for fashion started back when I was a kid. My dad, he was like one of the first black national sales rep for Reebok. So he took me to all the trade shows, the magic shows that were out in California, Vegas area, and went to all like the department stores. So at a young age, I definitely loved like vintage and like stuff like his own personal collection from like back in like the 60s, 70s. And then also just traveling with him and going to all the different department stores across the East Coast definitely sparked the interest. That's kind of how I got I was born into it.
Well, I started the brand in 2012 doing just upcycled jewelry. 2013, I met you, and we combined our talents and then opened our store on Chincoteague in 2014. A few years in, about what, 3 years in, we bought the bus.
About 2-3 years in, we bought the bus, and a lot of, it's a tourist-based destination island. It's not on the way to anything, so a lot of customers were coming from all over, from like California, Richmond, DC, New York, and they were always like, you know, like, you guys are really in the middle of nowhere, like you guys need to come to us.
I wanted to buy the bus because it allowed us to be able to go away when our business was seasonal. We could then go away the rest of the year and still be able to target our customers. And then so every time we would come to Richmond, to VCU, it was great. And we always had so much support. People were really excited. And so every time we would leave, you know, we'd be here for just a few days and then go back or go to Virginia Tech or wherever, and we'd be like, maybe we should be in Richmond.
With round two, their name is, you know, a second chance pretty much at clothing and shoes. You know, come bring it here, you know, if you want to really get rid of it and get, you know, the right amount of cash for it that you deserve. And this way, you know, someone will make use of the item that you're, you know, either done with or don't want to wear, or they're just collecting dust. So this gives it another second go for someone else to enjoy the item that you aren't maybe anymore. Round two, established 2013 by the three owners, Sean, Chris, and Luke. They, you know, met through the grapevines of each other, whether they knew a friend of a friend, and then, you know, they came down to Richmond all on their own, and just, you know, one thing led to another. You know, they like the same things, you know, old stuff, you know, memorabilia, nostalgia, all of that, and just we're like, I think we can make something out of this. They got the city of Richmond on their back. They good little following, posting through Instagram all day, every day, you know, treating the customers right, the people right, giving back to the community, and, you know, till this day, you know, we're still blessed to have the customer base that still come here, still enjoy us. You know, they've come and gone. I think me and the fellows right here are holding it down. So, I mean, I'm enjoying every day of this, so I love it here. Me personally, started a while back. I used to go to community college down the street, and then I did go to VCU. A lot in the meantime, you know, after my studies or even before, I did a lot of thrifting. When I quit my old job, I did it for a minute, 6 days a week. You know, just going hard, you know, just flipping stuff, coming to the shop, you know, at least twice a week and seeing the homies that I see now every day. Yeah, just finding unique stuff in the thrifts and then shopping here. It's a good little mixture of stuff that you don't see at the mall, so it's very unique. I got the job here early 2016, so I've been here about 3.5 years. I love it. I did go to VCU, 10 classes away from graduating. Just, you know, 5 classes and them being 3, 2, 1, then 0, and you know, I just could never enjoy myself. You know, like everybody else was in the class, they were just so excited to be there, and I was like, I'm really not excited to be here. And I knew I was excited to be in the shop, you know, doing what I love.
Kind of though, the way we broke up the shop was then each brand could do whatever they wanted in their own space, but then it still needed to feel cohesive. And so I think that's kind of like was my role, was like, all right, well, if we could put, you know, I mean, Derek and I obviously work together on everything, but like, you know, if we could put certain, you know, brands in certain places, like how would it flow? And, you know, having like the plants against the wall, like that was like a good idea. And I mean, everyone has kind of like contributed to their space. But like, it's, like I said, kind of an evolution because it's just ever changing. I kind of think the name, like Reunion, is kind of a sense of like all these different people from different places, but it's like a family reunion.
But as far as thrifting, that's May Merced's thing. Like, they got the connects on like just vintage and repurposing clothes, and I'm a designer, so bringing my ideas with their talent is perfect. Fits right. Being that my brand was like new generation and a streetwear, at that, the collaborations only felt right with just different aspects and different things to make my brand branch out in different avenues. We did from jean jackets to bomber jackets to college jackets, but our next project going to be pants. It's going to be crazy. We got a lot of things that I got to keep secret though.
So definitely Sean, of all 3 of the owners, is huge into, you know, 80s and 90s nostalgia. Just, yeah, a lot of Space Jam, a lot of Michael Jordan, and, you know, in contrast, we sell a lot of Air Jordans, so it kind of makes it go hand in hand. Very cool aesthetic, you know. You see something different. We have that Jordan memorabilia wall. I see something new every day. It's just very cool, like what they did back then compared to now.
I walked in, the atmosphere, it was pretty nice. This was back when they was about a few blocks down, their first spot, and it was real nice. There was a lot of people in there, and that was surprising because it was, what, 9 o'clock on a Saturday? I know this back when Sean and Chris were actually in the shop, and I walked in, I'm just looking around, like, okay, first time like, I've been in the actual shoe store, now that I'm actually into shoes. And then I seen some metallic 5s, and I tried them on. They fit great, they look great, and it was like maybe $90 or like $100. Like, I gotta get these right now. Yeah. So I talked my mom into buying them for me, and so that was my first experience with them. After that, it was really a routine, maybe week after week after week. Me going around too, getting different jerseys, different hoodies, just depending on what I was seeing that day. I think I might buy these right now. Yeah, I have to walk out with them.
The thought, or, you know, in us carrying out the ability to open these new stores, especially our New York one, you know, New York rent is not cheap. You know, it is where the big boys play. So for us to make it out there in Los Angeles too, that's crazy, you know, to compete with the big stores like Flight Club and Riff and stuff like that. So that we were able to come out of little Richmond, Virginia and do it like that. I think I'm at my peak, and you know, I'm performing the best of my ability. You know, a lot of obstacles come in the way, but I just like to stay here as long as I can, you know, and be happy. You know, my time will be up soon, so who knows when that'll be.
Having the store here has kind of put us in like the big leagues, I feel like, where we were doing all these things prior and been working so hard, but like our customer, we only could get to see them like one time. One time if they came on vacation, one time at the music festival. Now we're getting to build these relationships with customers that are coming in.
Keeping up with the demand, being like a small business, we don't have our own manufacturing. So with that, it presents a lot of challenges because we're only 2 people, so we're only able to like bang out X amount of things, and we don't want to charge like crazy prices for stuff.
So now we're looking like we need to really assemble a team. I need to hire not just a person to work the front. I need a team, which is actually so amazing that VCU is right here. So we're actually utilizing fashion design and merchandising interns, which I hope will then maybe we could then get some hire some designers. I feel like we make a good team, and I think that's an important thing.
But it's also a challenge.
Yeah. Oh, look now. Of course it is. It's never gonna be just easy.
But yeah. I think.
Well, that's it for this semester's documentaries from broadcast journalism capstone students in VCU's Robertson School of Media and Culture. We thank you for joining us and hope to see you again after the fall semester. I'm Bill Oglesby. Good night.